PIH is one of its main objectives is to influence and change how public services like education, health, social care and criminal justice system are delivered to the mixed race population. This is done through discussion and debate. To begin to explore this issue, we have chosen to look at a past generation of mixed race people. What could we learn from hearing of their lived experience?
So it really is about people having their own journey and searching. So I had a discussion when I was 13 with my black aunt in the in the USA, when she used the word colored. And I said, as a know-it-all 13-year-old, you mean black, don't you? And she said, little boy, when I was your age, the term was nigger. So you can't tell me nothing. So my identity is continually being processed. The last milestone was when I lost my hair, when I was completely bald. And that was significant for me because at that time, I re-experienced something that hadn't happened to me for a long time. People began to ask me, what are you? So my father was Jamaican. I didn't know him until I was 40. My mother married a black American, and we went to the US. And then after they divorced, we returned here. And was probably about 14 at the time. So I spent time going back and forth to the US, but didn't meet my father till I was 40. We were so like each other, I found him extremely annoying. Very annoying. If you are mixed race, but you only see yourself as black, or you only see yourself as white, there may be an underlying tension there, which is one of guilt, because you're essentially rejecting an important aspect of self. Right, well, I think someone's shaking their head. That's interesting, because it may, of course, be that this assumes that people are being brought up by two parents, by two birth parents. It's very complicated. I can't even begin to explore it in 25 minutes because it has to do with culture, it has to do with relationships, and with familiarity, acceptance, nurturing, attachment. I sometimes meet people, and my children tell me I'm hypersensitive to mixed people. So I drive around the road, mix, which I used to do when they were young. Okay? Right, just to go back. As a sense of family, because we did not deny the impact of race. Race has high significance in the family. So it was over the table, at breakfast, at lunch. We discussed it, we processed it, and they have processed it in different ways according to their development. So as a family, by not ignoring the significance of race, we are still a family where my two children are comfortable with themselves because I'm still processing issues. So if anyone asks me, Nick, what is the answer? I will say, I don't even know the question. I'm still processing things, still finding out, still discovering.
We're all products of our parents. Their actions reflect on who we are, whatever or whoever that might be. But we, as the children, have to take the ownership that I'm doing this as on behalf of my wife and another story as well. So I've got two stories to tell. So I'm going to be reading a lot of the information because they are quotes. Start. The topic has been announced as unlocking obesity's demystifying experiences in the 1940s and 50s with mixed race children. Now, we're going to elaborate on that story a little bit more. But just to start off with, I'd say if I was to write a newspaper article, the headline would be "Wartime GI babies are running out of time to track down their GI fathers." There's quite a lot in that. And what does it really mean? So let's take a look at it. So after the Second World War, Britain was occupied by the US Army, and we were surrounded by GIs, which, through the eyes of young women, were amazing men with a very different outlook on life compared to the British men at that time. Remember also that these British men would all have been away in Europe fighting the war. Take another look and go back in time. The final years of the Second World War, Britain was being bled dry, and life was pretty grim. And then, like a circus coming to town, the Americans, they suddenly appeared over here, and a generation of young British women were simply swept off their feet by these dashing young men with little or no inhibitions. Very different life to what we live today. During the mid-40s and the late 50s, there were countless friendships, affairs, liaisons, marriages, not thousands of them, but hundreds of thousands of these things going on. The Americans seemed to have a never-ending supply of silk stockings and chocolates and cash. When it was all over, the Yanks had gone home. They left a lasting legacy of thousands of babies. Today, many of them are approaching or already in their 60s, and many of them still have not traced their fathers. Time is running out. The GI generation is dying out. Jim, so prior to my birth, my mother was married and had 4 children with her husband. It's prior to his birth. From what I've been told, she met my father when I was out with a friend at local dances. She became pregnant with me, and it's not clear if my mother remained with her husband until my birth or when she became pregnant. There's a little bit of doubts of seed of doubt there. However, after she separated from her husband because she was pregnant, he refused to allow her to have any further contact with her other 4 children. This was in the 1940s, the mid-1940s, 1945. They were told that their mother was a bad person, and how upon reflection, considered that they were brainwashed by her father, by his father. So I've added, in the 1940s, having a child out of wedlock was considered bad. Having a child to another man when married, even worse. But having a child to another man of a different colour was absolutely a no-no. Society did not know how to deal with that. I lived with my mother in lodgings for a short period of time. He doesn't remember this piece, but this is the story he was given. And because of the poor accommodation, my mother's health became poor. Returning to America, I presume he was fighting in the war. My father has since stated that he continued to write to my mother for a short time, and she would reply. Later he reported that my grandmother and my aunt would reply to these letters, although this stopped when I was around 2 years of age. I suspect somebody may have been intercepting the post rather than my mother too, so she was too ill. I remained living with my grandparents until I was 2 years of age. So it gets a bit sad. My mother spent large periods of time in hospital during this period, although I have not been informed the reasons for this. From the records that I have accessed, I have learned that I have been placed in children's home from the age of 2 years. I believe I was placed in the home as my grandparents did not want to care for me due to the prejudice they suffered due to me being a result of a mixed relationship. Being born out of wedlock and a result of adultery. Times were very different then, and despite this, they paid for my placement, and therefore this prevented me from being adopted or transported, because in those days you could be shipped out of the country to Australia or in various regions why this could not happen. But I believe she was influenced by her parents. On regular occasions, my placement was received, and it always said that I could not be considered for fostering as I was black. My time at the children's home was difficult. It did not feel nice, and I do not remember anyone from my family coming to visit. Well, there was an older couple that used to come take me out. When I was 6 years old, I contracted TB. I spent 16 months in a sanitarium. I was visited by my mother and her new boyfriend, and they would visit monthly. In the sanitarium, I do remember being taken for walks around the grounds. Whilst there, I also contracted several other childhood ailments such as mumps, measles and other illnesses, so he was quite an unwell little kid at that time. I do remember having friends at that time, but everyone I made friends with passed away. And I feel that this still influences my ability to get close to people. And when I was a child, I suffered so much loss and bereavement. My mother eventually remarried, and when I left the hospital, I returned to my grandparents' home along with my mother and her new husband. We were there for a short time before moving to a council house nearby. I was adopted by my mother and her new partner when I was 12 years old. I was unaware of what this meant other than the change in my surname. I was aware my surname was different from my mother's, and I was asked when I was about 9 about changing my name, but did not want to do this. My birth father was also asked for permission to change my name for the adoption, but he also refused, but it still happened nonetheless. As a child growing up, I was not given any information about my father. I had no idea who my father was, and I knew I was different to others due to me being dual heritage and my skin colour different from my mother. I was always called names in primary school due to my colour, and this was at a time when there were few or no black people in the area. I remember getting into many fights as a result of the name calling, and this continued onto secondary school. I became good at sports, especially running and athletics, and this made others more accepting. My mother passed away in 1970, and my adopted father in 85. My mother had asked me not to search my birth father while my adopted father was still alive, and also said that he may have family of his own and not want me to turn up in his life. Then he went on and contacted the agency of Trace, and they helped us to find my father. There was a US documentary made on this. I can't find a record of it, but I remember the filming at the time. There was a film crew hovering around the family for quite a while. While searching, I obtained a copy of my original birth certificate, and my father had to put his army number there. That was the magic ingredient. I was lucky to have 13 years with my father, and when I first met him, it was clear that he had always waited for me to find him. He had also tried to find me, but due to being adopted, this was impossible, because the UK will not let you find adopted people. He did not know that I'd been living in the early years in a children's home. I was very upset by this. My father had a photograph of me as a small chap, and he carried this in his wallet all his life. He had a child in America before he came to the UK. He remained with his wife until he passed away this year. My experience as a child had impacted me throughout my life. The lack of education has prevented me from excelling in any career, and I've therefore worked manual jobs that do not require academic qualifications. I also feel that my relationships with others have been affected. I am not an outgoing person, and I consider myself to be too serious. I also find it difficult to become close to others, and I keep them at a distance. I feel this is due to the experiences of loss I suffered as a child, and by not getting close to others. It protects me from further rejection. The racism I suffered as a child is not as apparent in society as it once was, but I still would not put myself in situations if I knew others did not like black people.
Those were quite emotional stories that I know you have heard. But it does give us some insight into young people of that day and of that time and of that generation in their struggle to find their identity and to later on in life find out about their fathers, fortunately for them, or certainly indeed their families. So respect to those that generation of now men and women, but in the day as children, products of many American servicemen here during the many children, mixed race children, were in the care system in that day and time. So my greatest respect to that generation of people, and I am the generation after. We all have our personal stories and experiences. Many of us, myself included, who never knew their fathers and have had to make this journey on our own. And
On a personal note, I'd like to say that part of my take on this is that I would like, and I'm sure Nick will agree with me and echo what I'm saying. Can I speak for you, Nick, as well, and say, as we spoke about this in the break, we would really hope that for children today, that they had a journey in life which was less hard, less difficult, which was our experience. And let's hope that that can be the case.